Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Through a Scottish Prism, I hope you and yours are all well. Been another very eventful week, both within Scotland and without Scotland. Lots of things happening for and to Scotland. And that's why we're here today again, as always, to discuss those things. And where better to start, Phil? You know, we're in an election period, and you know, some of the parties are stretching it to incredulity. I mean, the Labour are talking about change, vote for us to stop the SNP. The Tories are saying vote for us to stop the SNP. Reform are saying the same. But here is now John Swinney's joined in with this, oh, that's not the one I wanted, you silly boy. Yes, it is. They want to vote SNP 1-2 to lock out the Farage, and it's exactly the exact opposite of that. We know from history of this election and from the D'Hondt system that SNP 1 and 2 will actually elect reform. It won't stop reform. It will collect lots of unionists. It won't stop them. John is being less than, he's either very stupid or he's being disingenuous. Which do you think?
Disingenuous by crystal clear. And Scotland is at breaking point. If we continue to listen and take advice and direction from John Swinney and his ilk, and I mean the leadership of the SNP who are controlled, the SNP members and the good friends and dear friends that we have within the SNP who are still passionate about independence are diminishing in numbers because they too see this. It's obvious. SNP 1 and 2 only gets in more unionists. And the fact that the SNP leadership stood against the only common sense strategy championed by none other than Alex Salmond tells us all we need to know about who directs the SNP leadership. I've pointed out many times, there's an article in Private Eye called Revolving Doors. It explains how politicians who are the highest class of servant, who serves the people that really run the country, how they get their payoff after being in Parliament. Read Private Eye's Revolving Doors. It tells you exactly how it works. So the politicians in so-called Western democracies are simply the highest level servants of those who are really in control. And again, don't take my word for it. Check out the alternative media, not mainstream media. And I remember the final point in this I would say was, I remember being asked as when I was an MP in Westminster, can you summarise what politics is all about in 5 minutes or less? And I said, no, but I know someone that can. George Carlin, The American Dream. It's because you've got to be asleep to believe it. He articulated perfectly in a satirical comedy skit 30, 40 years ago exactly what was going on, and it's still happening, and we're being asset stripped, and that's why Scotland is broken, by listening to liars like John Swinney.
Yeah, you notice, folks, that we've got some new faces here in us, and one of them is Gordon Ross, who's one of the lead candidate for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland in the west of Scotland. Welcome, Gordon, as a newbie to our show. What do you make of John Swinney saying, you know, SNP 1-2 will keep out reform?
Well, you know, if you remember why the voting system was switched to this two-stage system in the first place, Labour announced it in a fanfare when the Scottish Parliament was set up, that the voting system was really designed to keep us from getting a pro-independence majority in the first place.
Yeah.
And so voting 1 and 2 SNP is actually just playing straight into that playbook. It's just basically doing exactly what that system was designed to do, preventing ourselves from getting a majority in that house. So if we believe that, and we believe what Mr. Swinney says, he's basically accepting the British rules of engagement when it comes to politics in Holyrood. And that is something that needs to change. And for senior politicians such as Mr. Swinney to accept that is absolutely incredible. He, of all people, should know better.
He should, and he probably does. And we also welcome back the ex-leader of the Sovereignty Party, David McCutcheon. Nice to see you back again, David. Hope you're well.
Doing well, yes. Thank you.
What do you make of this SNP 1-2 to keep out the others? It's just the SNP have joined in with the rest of them and is bad into these British politics. Vote for me. They're putting party before the nation.
I think there's maybe another aspect to this. While openly they're saying SNP 1, SNP 2, what they realise is going to happen is a big SNP 1 Green 2 vote. And I think that they're tacitly on board with that. The problem with that is that not the SNP and definitely not the Greens, neither of these parties are serious about independence. They don't have a plan for it. They're not pursuing any effective action towards independence. They're acting as House nationalists. House nationalists in Holyrood is a way of essentially siphoning energy out of the independence movement, leading to demoralization, leading to a sense of helplessness and powerlessness. The only opposition that the SNP truly fears is from a party, or in our case, an alliance, a coalition of parties more serious about independence than they are. And they're not, and that's not a very high bar, but we are, and that is why the alliance has achieved extraordinary things in such a short period of time, as really making waves. It's getting coverage in the national press, some absolutely eye-opening opinion poll results. It's not because of any particular genius on our part, because we're responding to the desire of the Scottish people to have effective action on independence. And that is an expression of their democratic will. And that is, as I say, the one thing that I genuinely believe that Swinney is afraid of.
Yeah, it's funny, amazing. Most of the attacks that are coming upon Alliance to Liberate Scotland are coming from so-called pro-independence because maybe they don't like it. Even for years on this show, now we've said it, we can categorically state it. We have said vote for an independence candidate in the constituency and an independence party in the list. We have been very specific about that. We haven't said Alliance to Liberate Scotland 1, Alliance to Liberate Scotland 2, and don't vote anyone else. We have been promoting on this particular podcast, and you have when you've been out in your talks, that you need, I mean, the Hunt system was fixed so that two parties were needed. That was to keep out the SNP. And that's why that system needs to have a two-party vote.
Of course it does. And Alex Salmond, obviously, as we've already alluded to, spoke about this at length in 2021. And if people had listened, if the SNP had cooperated, and if the SNP had encouraged the vote that Alec indicated then was the correct way, when Alba stood only on the lists, then we would have had a supermajority and Scotland would now be an independent country. That's fact, because that supermajority would have created that international recognition that is so vital. In addition, the popular votes would have been in the majority as well as the seats in the majority, so that that outcome of that election would have had credibility across all different measurements, all different parameters. And that's where we are again this year, but with different political parties, obviously. Now, the position with Alliance to Liberate Scotland is that we have 40 candidates across the 8 regions, but we have 14 constituency candidates. And the reason for that is that we want to take the fight to the SNP. We want to cooperate with them on independence, but we want to back them into a corner whereby they've got no alternative but to fight for independence, create a realistic plan and create the unity in the movement that Phil speaks about every week and that Phil particularly promoted at the recent Yes United event. And that was a meeting of kindred spirits who were frustrated on the one hand, but on the other, absolutely determined to move the dial. Now, the reality at SNP 1, SNP 2 for now is that will let Unionists in on the list. Of that, there is no doubt. But even if the SNP somehow manage to create a majority of SNP MSPs, their difficulty is it will not be a credible majority because it will be based on about 30% of the popular vote. What needs to happen is the popular vote for independence has to be more than 50%. So if you genuinely desire independence, then you will have two different vote. You use your votes differently as between the constituency and the list. But if, like in my case, you want to give the sitting MSP a run for his money, obviously I'm standing against Keith Brown in Clackmannanshire and Dunblane, and I'm looking for constituency votes as well as list votes, because I think I'd do a better job for my area and for my country than my current MSP is.
You surely would, without a doubt, Eva. But again, we'll go back to that phrase that was used earlier, not exactly a high bar, but you would be much, much higher than what's in there just now. Another thing that comes up, I mean, we know that it's not a level playing field, Phil. And you were involved in the carry on with the Electoral Commission, where the name of Liberate Scotland had to be changed because of confusion. And this week, another thing came to being, which is just the exact same here, was that our friend, more affectionately Alistair McConaughey, known as Manky Jacket, formed a party called the Independent Green Voice Party. But because he's a unionist, he's allowed to have the words green and party in their list. We were told because a campaigning, not in a campaigning group, but someone with a different name, a similar name to ours, we had to change our name so it wouldn't confuse the voters. But surely Independent Green Voice Party, that I would suggest is more confusing.
Yes, and you should, if you want to understand what this guy's all about, there's a clip on YouTube where he's talking about a heavy metal clip or video or an album, and it's like Defenders of the Faith, and it looks like a Mad Al Yankovic skit, but we should get it up at some point. It's just has to be seen to be believed. But no, this was we jumped through hoops, and thanks in no small part to Alan Petrie, who carried a lot of this and was responsible for getting our constitution and some of the documentation done on what we had to do with the Electoral Commission, and jumped through so many hoops. So the Scottish Greens have been effectively complaining to the Electoral Commission about the Independent Green Voice Party's branding. And you've got to laugh at it, because this guy is about as green as you are, Roddy, as a big Rangers man. You know, so it's an absolute nonsense. But we're using the words Independent Green Voice with green in large letters. It's like there's nothing green about this guy at all. And then this change has raised concerns among supporters of the Scottish Greens, who've accused IGV of confusing voters and potentially costing them 2 seats in the 2021 Holyrood election. You know, it's the way back. But when you look at this, the Greens have submitted multiple complaints to the Electoral Commission regarding the IGV's the name, right? They could lead to voter confusion. Now, they certainly, for us, what we saw, the double standard you talked about, is they wouldn't allow us to use Liberate Scotland as it clashed with Liberation, which isn't even a political party. Yet here you've got someone using the independent voice of the Green Party, the actual name of the party, and their accepted the name of the party, and yet we had to jump through hoops, and they cost us so much time, so much pain. And basically they deliberately scuppered this. So yes, if you're truly independence minded, there seems to be a different rule that apply, yeah. And boy, did they make it difficult for us. So effectively, what they did, they hamstrung us, because by only giving us 3 months from the formation of the party to our first election, it has made it painfully difficult, as anyone who's worked on an election within any political party knows, the cart herding that's required. But here we are, and as David said earlier, what we've achieved in the 7 weeks or so is just nothing short of remarkable, and it's down to those who are carrying the can. You know, and big shout out to Eva and Hazel, who've done a lot of the heavy lifting here. But it's quite incredible what's been achieved. Also, The actual irony here, though, finally, is they did us a favour by forcing us to change it to Alliance to Liberate Scotland.
Yeah.
One, we do exactly what we're saying on the tin. Aye, it's an alliance for Liberate Scotland, and we're top of the list.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's amazing what's happened. I just we mentioned in the first question there, Gordon, that they fixed up the voting system to suit the Unionists, and again, it would seem here that this is helping the Unionists and damaging what is seen as another independence party. There are two sets of rules.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the other things that I noticed, I don't know if anyone else did, when McConaughey changed the name of his party to Independent Green Voice, the word independent got in there as well. Now, that's not an accident. And I am prepared to bet a large sum of money that McConaughey wasn't smart enough to think that up by himself. And I would love to know who it was who decided on the new name, because I'm definitely sure it wasn't McConaughey himself. He's just a mouthpiece. And the idea of him draping himself in greenery, just as Phil says, is just so ridiculous that it's not credible at all. But it's just another one of these attempts to try to give the impression that they are independent, or they're talking about being independent, and they're also talking about a green voice. This is all just really basic dirty tricks 101. It would be subtle if it was coming from anybody else but McConaughey, but it's so transparent and it's so stupid that you and I, everybody on the screen here today, can see that this is a load of nonsense, and I'll be willing to bet you most of the voters see through it as well.
Yeah, absolutely, David. This is all a bit of a farce. We're having a wee bit of a laugh here, but the way things are manipulated, from your party, the way you have been attacked as a party for certain views that they suggest that you're held. There's this implication: if you don't agree with the mainstream, you're either far left or you're far right. They just don't accept things for what they truly are.
Yeah, I think that's very clearly the propagandists for the House Nationalists. That's going to be their strategy heading into the election. It's everyone to my left's far leftist, everyone to my right's far right. And the whole thing is about trying to deflect attention away from the lack of action. I mean, how long have they had? 15 years to actually put together credible plan, have some credible action on independence. Nothing has happened, and I think there's that. Yeah, we've obviously been in the National this past week, a bit of guilt by association, as it were, from a candidate who I think has been very, very clear that he believes in free speech and he believes in reaching out to Unionists. And that was my understanding of his motivation. But when we've got, a situation where, and I sort of get what everyone's saying about Independent Green Voice as being a very disingenuous name. I think the bigger issue that we have in general in Scottish politics is that all of the parties are at it. The Scottish Nationalist Party increasingly don't seem to be particularly nationalist. They're not fighting the cause of the Scottish nation. Labour have given up on the working classes and ordinary working people. Conservatives aren't conserving anything. And the Greens really don't seem to care much about the environment either. And I think in general, people are feeling really disenfranchised and disillusioned by politics. And so if there is a challenge for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland, it is to stay true to that one line of independence, nothing less and nothing else, to continuously make that front and foremost and ask the electorate to hold us to that standard. So if we fail, and I don't believe we will, I think there's too many people that are too focused on breaking free from the union. But if we fail for lack of inaction, we will expect to be punished by the electorate for that. We've made it very, very clear, I think, what the Alliance is all about. And I am sure I have every confidence from all the conversations that I'm having with people in the background that regaining our independence is going to be our single overriding priority. That is what is going to take up the vast majority of our time over the next 5 years when we get folk elected to Holyrood. They're certainly not going to Holyrood to settle down. They're going to Holyrood to shake things up, to paraphrase a famous phrase. So, and it's going to be a time as well. I don't think, one thing I would say is this is not going to be easy. If we think the attacks are bad now, when we have no elected representatives, once we actually start making concrete steps towards independence, anyone involved with the alliance, anyone that is making effective progress on breaking free from the UK is going to be under these attacks. It's a shame that it's coming from publications like The National, headquartered in Bournemouth, that are supposedly on our side. But it's the reality. This is what we're going to have to face. And this is when we as a people, as the Scottish people, have to decide, do we want independence or we not? Or do we not? Are we willing to pay the price that it will take to get independence?
Cheers. Can I just say, for those of you, that my cat was trying to get attention and walked across the screen there. It's wanting playtime. Eva, on this, the name change, you were heavily involved with the rest of the Alliance to Liberate Scotland team on the shenanigans with the Electoral Commission. Will you not, when you see this, does it not get you a wee, like me, it gets me a wee bit angry of what we went through for them to just sail right through?
It's just entirely predictable. That's the way it works. If you want to break the union, if you want to do something different and climb out of the box and give democracy a chance, then the British state will hamper you at every turn. What I was interested to see too was that the Daily Record have had to be written to by our press officer to point out that the independent Green voice is not associated with our alliance in any way, because in the Ayrshire online edition of the Record, they had listed independent Green voice and one other person as being candidates under the heading for Alliance to Liberate Scotland in the South Region. So in the South Region, for the avoidance of doubt, the list candidates, and two of them are also constituency candidates, are Terry Howson, Gary Macleay, Yvonne Lazenbury, Maureen Johnson and Marjorie Ellis-Thompson. So Terry and Gary are constituency candidates in a couple of different constituencies in the south, and the 5 people are named, you'll see 4 of them are women. They're the regional list candidates. So that correspondence has gone on behalf of our leader to the Daily Record, and we await a response, a retraction and an apology, because what we're not going to have is ourselves associated with independent Green voice, whether he's independent unionist or otherwise. He's not in our alliance, never has been, never will be. But no, I'm not surprised at any of this, but I actually think it's quite funny that the Greens have got the cheek to complain about it. Where would we start if we had to list the complaints about the performances of the Greens in the last Parliament? All the mistakes that they made, their broken promises. They were claiming in 21 that they were there for the pursuit of independence. That's what they said in their manifesto in 21. And yet, in the course of that Parliament, they said independence was not a red line. So anybody who's an independence supporter should know from that never to trust the Greens ever again.
Yeah, you can't trust anything that's green, I say. That's just my opinion. No bias there whatsoever. But on that, I mean, just a quick one, ladies and gentlemen. I just saw this morning, and as you're probably all aware, and we tried to, actually, I was sticking up for Joni Reid when we discussed it, that until she was found guilty of it, and she shouldn't be pillared, and she shouldn't have had to go out the whip. That's just justice for her. But the Daily Record managed to turn, the fact it's now come out that she had an affair, or she was having some relationships with 2 nuclear submarine commanders. But how they managed to do it, but the Daily Record managed to turn it into an SNP bad story, when the SNP asked for an inquiry. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're up against. Her husband's been arrested on suspicion of being a Chinese spy. She's been carrying on with 2 nuclear submarine commanders, but it's SNP bad because the SNP happen to want is security because half of our population could be wiped out. Apparently, the SNP are the danger to security. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're up against and at all times. And so that's what we've got to always remember. But here's the other one. This week, news come out, and it's down south, but it does have an effect up here in general, because Skybus, who are a company that fly out of Cornwall, have had to suspend all flights because they've run out of aviation fuel, because all the aviation fuel in the UK was made in Grangemouth, refined in Grangemouth. And now we're running out because we're getting it from the Middle East now, Phil. And you may be aware there's some slight problems with getting that. But this just shows you the stupidity of closing Grangemouth.
Yes, we're not getting it out of the Middle East. As Scotland is an independent nation, especially given the resources we have, we certainly need a refinery, which will take a long time to build. But there's things we can do. I specialise in FPSOs, so we can use FPSOs to gather and partially process our reserves. We can go on and talk about that on other issues later on. But yeah, this is a nonsense. This is we're not getting in from the Middle East because the Strait of Hormuz is closed. The actual where we're probably going to get most of our stuff from is the Americans. The American crude, the American oil is very, very light. When you frack, it's extremely light. That's why they want Venezuelan oil, because they can blend it and produce far more products. But anyway, that's a side issue. This UK airline has cancelled its London flights because of the surge in fuel prices. And they operate daily flights between Gatwick and Newquay, right? And they confirmed it this morning. They said that they only started offering this route in November after Eastern Airways went into admin. I used to use Eastern Airways when I was on, because that's where most of the refineries are. Even we had one in Scotland, most of them are down in England. And I did some work on the Humber refinery, amongst others. I fly down there using Eastern Airlines because it services the small regional airports in England, which Edinburgh and Scotland are, incidentally, because of the UK is considered. We have regional airports too. But anyway, they say the rise in fuel costs and lack of passenger bookings were among the reasons they cancelled it. Now, is this the sign of things to come? Yes, especially for those countries whose governments are still supportive of the illegal war against the Israel and America are fighting against Iran and all around the Middle East. And the Middle East is fighting back. And guess what? They're actually winning. They're actually stopping the world economy in its tracks. And it's down to, and America's not worried about this. They've got enough fuel. But Europe is in serious trouble. The rest of the world is in serious trouble. And this is the shape of things to come.
Yeah. It's amazing, Gordon, that usually we know usually that what's an election time in Scotland, we hear that the oil is running out and there'll be no use to Scotland if we vote the wrong way, according to our friends. But this time it's a reality. We're run out of aviation fuel. And this is the first airline. But this goes back to the short-sightedness of the UK government and how not only they damaged Scotland with their scorched earth policy, but they're also now damaging themselves.
I couldn't agree more, actually. I was just about to say exactly that. The UK has been so obsessed with trying to deindustrialise Scotland and remove any industrial advantages we once had. And Grangemouth was one of those, even though it was an ageing plant. It was our ability to refine fuels. But now it's hurting their own aviation industry, and they didn't see that coming. I mean, that just beggars belief. Who is in charge of their transport industry? Who's in charge of the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Industry down in England, who didn't think that through, who thought that just shutting down a refinery in Scotland and moving most of the work down into England wouldn't cause them a problem? So yeah, you're right. I mean, the United Kingdom has gradually been isolating itself more and more and more ever since Brexit, in fact. and has now shot itself in the other foot by basically removing its ability to refine jet fuel. So now it's having to buy jet fuel from a place that's blockaded because of a war that was started by a United States president who doesn't really care whether the rest of the world has oil or not. And we are at the whims of these neoliberals down in London who think that the world global market is the way to run the country, that all the rules should be set by global oil markets. It's absolutely stupid. You need to be self-sufficient in your own resources in order to be a stable country. The UK is not a stable country, if you can even call it a country. Scotland would be if we controlled all our resources, refined all our own fuels, and whatever fraction was left over that we didn't use could be sold on. But right at the moment, nobody talks about that.
It really is a disgrace, David. And if I should, this another irony. I'd never heard of this before in my life, but I don't know if you saw this headline this week. A guy put this on Grangemouth and Skinflats, was just out to let you know the Asda Grangemouth has no petrol. My mum was just there. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be quite funny, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's so ironic. We've, when we called our party sovereignty, it was essentially a big middle finger up to essentially a centuries-old English project of not respecting other countries' sovereignty. It goes way back in history, from the conquest of Wales, of Ireland, of Scotland, the growth of the English Empire. Why do we call it the British Empire, actually? I'm not entirely sure about that one. I like the English Empire because it is a continuation of that growth, that desire to run other people's country. And if you look at England's relations with Iran, right the way through the 19th century, they were meddling in Iranian internal affairs. And just before oil was discovered, in 1901, the Iranians signed something called the Darcy Concession. The Shah basically handed over Iranian oil to the English for only 16% royalties per year. And worse, they cheated. They cheated horrifically, and they would sell to the Royal Navy Iranian oil for well below the price that it would have fetched in the markets. They were thieving Iranian oil, and they had been for years. And despite even the Pahlavis, they were trying to do things to resist, but they were tools of the British Empire, and they didn't. And when Mossadegh in the 50s came along and tried to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, I mean, the games that the CIA and MI6 played was horrific. It's this constant interference in other countries' sovereignty, constant interference, constantly trying to, I think the way to understand the empire, particularly the English Empire, is controlling other people's government in order to take the resources. It's as simple as that, and we are witnessing the continuation of that today. Yes, primarily led by the US and Israel. But all of this is just like downstream consequences for that. If Scotland had its independence back, if we were able to produce our own oil, sell it in world markets, get a fair price for it, you wouldn't have shortages at Asda. Well, you maybe wouldn't have Asda's in Grangemouth, I don't know, but you certainly wouldn't have shortages in the petrol stations of Grangemouth. This is the result of the imperialist, neoconservative, neoliberal project that refuses to leave other countries alone, to let them have their own industries, to let them rule themselves, to have their own independent, autonomous governments. It's not complex. That is what makes for a fairer world. And that's why we as a party have always been pro-neutrality for Scotland, but anti-imperialist, anti-neoconservative. That is really what sovereignty at its heart is about. So, I think it's only going to worse. Look at the situation with 20% or something of the world's crude oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. It's particularly going to affect things like diesel. Well, you might be like, I don't drive a diesel vehicle, I'm fine. But what about, your food? How does that get to the supermarket shelves? I mean, most of our haulage runs on diesel. The agricultural sector runs on diesel. manufacturing runs on diesel. It's essential. And just because of the short-sightedness, the idiocy of these neoconservatives, please excuse the language, but we're finding ourselves in a situation where there's plenty of diesel in the world, but in Grangemouth, of all places, they've run out.
Yeah, terrible. I mean, the last time I looked at the Brent crude was now up to $148 a barrel or something. It was 60 or 80 not so long ago. Norway's making a fortune, folks. Fortunes. Guess who's not making any money? That would be us. Eva, without you saying, being a smart aleck, for years you were saying from the minute Grangemouth come under danger, you warned of all this. You told everyone, we mustn't let this end. We've got to keep it open because X, Y, and Z will happen. Now, I know you're not happy to be proved right, but you've been proved right.
Well, it didn't take rocket science to work it out, did it? I mean, the Westminster parliamentary constituency where I stood in 24 is called Alloa and Grangemouth. It comprises most of Clackmannanshire, a gerrymandered constituency as usual, but most of Clackmannanshire plus Grangemouth, Stennismuir, the surrounding area. And every single voter in that constituency was assured by Labour that voting Labour would save Grangemouth. They did not lift a finger to save the Grangemouth refinery, but sadly, neither did the Scottish Government. So the SNP and Labour are both as much to blame as the Tories are for Grangemouth's closure. There's no two ways about it. But what that was deliberate continued deindustrialisation, and the saving of Grangemouth should have been a national campaign. In essence, it's treated as a local campaign because it served the purposes of the leaders of various different political parties to pretend that it was simply a local issue when it was quite clearly literally a burning national issue that went to the very heart and still goes to the very heart of Scotland's potential as an industrial nation. And what really grinds my gears is that we've heard often enough about, for example, the Wind Fund and how Nicola Sturgeon made a bloody backside of that as well by selling it off as in a reverse auction. But I thought, when you were talking there about Norway, Roddy, I thought, I wonder how much the Norwegian oil fund is worth. And, I would struggle to write this down because apparently that Norway's oil fund, the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, is now valued at over $2 trillion. Now, you need to think twice. How many zeros is that? Because Norway invested sensibly. That's what Scotland should be doing, whether it's oil, gas, wind, wave, whatever it is. We should be looking after ourselves, and we could have a fund like that as a legacy for our children and our grandchildren. Think how Scotland would soar. I'm sitting here at the water beside Arbroath, and out in the North Sea there's oil rigs and there's wind farms, and any of the guys that are working out there are gazing on shore, and what are they seeing? Food banks, baby banks, school clothing banks, pensioners that can't choose between eating and heating, mothers that can't put shoes on their kids' feet, in a country that is absolutely brimming with potential, both in natural resources and human resources. And those politicians who do not promote independence for our country, it's on their head that there's still 1 in 4 children in Scotland living in poverty, that there are single working poor men and women in this country, and that there are serious funding issues across all public services, because with the power, the economic levers in our own hands, we can rebuild this country and turn it into the country that it was always destined to be. Independence, not less.
Absolutely, 100%. As I said earlier in the podcast, Phil, usually during election times, we're told that the oil's running out, or it's the wrong type of oil, or, it's not worth, you can't have your economy based on it, or anything like that. But here we are, the Tories. Drill, baby, drill. Save England. Drill more oil. They need to make up their minds one way or the other, Phil. Either it's running out, or they need it. We've lost Phil. Is he gone?
He's disappeared.
Well, that's to you then. That question to you then, Gordon. They need to make up their minds. Either it's running out or they desperately need us to drill more because there's so much there?
Well, the news from the oil industry is that there are countless new fields they can drill, especially off the northwest coast of Shetland. And there's still oil in the basin in the North Sea as well. Not to mention the fact there are loads of untapped gas fields. I know for a fact that they're drilling through existing spent gas deposits below them to other new gas deposits. So there is plenty there. And the further down they go into the North Sea, the more they seem to find. It's not inexhaustible, but it's much bigger resource than anybody ever imagined before. And now it's becoming impossible for the politicians to conceal that. And so instead of trying to conceal it, the Unionists are now saying, oh yeah, we should really drill. We've got all this immense wealth. Let's use it mostly for England's benefit, because they are the ones with the collapsing economy. The only reason the Scottish economy is so bad is because it reflects what the English government is doing in London and is applying the same kind of metric to our funding as they apply to their own. But it's our oil, it always was. It's inside our territorial boundaries, and we should be controlling it. And getting rid of Grangemouth was really the last straw for me as far as oil was concerned. Getting rid of Grangemouth was the ultimate defanging of the Scottish sort of wildcat, if you like. We don't have that refinery anymore, so it doesn't matter how much oil we discover or how much of it's pumped ashore here, it doesn't get refined here, and the profits taken from that refined or those refined commodities do not flow into our coffers. They go into London's coffers. And unless we break free from that type of control, we are never going, as Eva said, completely rightly, we should have had a much better future. Scotland is not meant to be in the situation it's in now. We are down a big rabbit hole here. This is like an alternate timeline that only exists because we're still in the Union. Had we voted yes in 2014, we wouldn't be having this kind of conversation just now. We would be celebrating.
Yeah, Phil, welcome back. Let me just change the question slightly to you. I mean, I said last week, I was quite happy that they're not drilling and we've got this thing going, because it means it's all the more for us when independence comes, because we're not going to get the benefit of this wealth. But the hypocrisy of the Unionists and the lies of the Unionists again are exposed.
Yes, it's always the case when Scotland voices its position on independence. The oil is suddenly running out. But election times again, so where's the money going to come from for these fantasy policies that these unionist parties have? Well, oil. Let's start drilling for more oil. We have in Scotland the UK's oil reserves, the UK continental shelf. Okay, that's what UNCLOS determines the borders or regions around where your control or your mineral rights extend. And because of the proximity of England to France and the Low Countries and Ireland, 66% of the sea area of the UKCS is in Scottish waters. And in that sea area, 97% of the known oil reserves are in Scottish waters. And I specialised, I've worked on oil all the way up through the North Sea, all the way. We're now west of Shetland. And we have, it's absolutely frightening because the UK's proven probable oil and gas reserves are estimated at 2.9 billion barrels of oil. Now, that was at the end of 2024. Now, you project that at current oil prices, then you see exactly why England doesn't want to let us go. So it's oil and gas reserves at 2.9 billion. You can go into the details, but rather than that, these are proven reserves. That's what I need to point out. What's that all about? Well, a company has to prove reserves before reporting them, and there's certain criteria and methods you have to use. We could go into more detail another time. Because if they haven't proven the reserves, then by exaggerating the reserves, they manipulate the share price. And the greedy corporate owners make even more money at a time when the only record figures in energy are one, the price per unit paid by the people, and the other record figure is the profit levels of the energy companies. So what folks need to know is that not only are we not even halfway through the known reserves, but we have much, much more off the west shore, west coast. We have the Norwegian option, the sovereign wealth fund that Eva talked about earlier. We don't actually have to use our oil and gas. We've got enough energy in Scotland that we don't even need nuclear. But that's also been imposed upon us for, as Gordon says, England's benefit. What we should be doing is hydroelectric, pumped storage, tidal. We should be using wave energy, a small portion of wind, not as much as we currently have imposed on us, and we should be using interconnectors to sell our energy all over the world instead of having it drained down through England. And we too, as Eva pointed out, would have a sovereign wealth fund in the billions, hundreds of billions, if not trillions.
Yeah. It is an irony, David, is it not, that the Tories who keep telling us we're too poor, too weak, too stupid, that they want to drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, there's, you know, I think there's another aspect to this. Look, certainly, the Tories are all in behind drilling at the moment, and this is supposedly pro-Scottish. It's clearly not. It's about resource extraction, exploitation, and theft. That's what we're looking at. And I think it's really important that we're quite clear-sighted as a movement about the opportunity side of that. And I think that's something that a lot of Scots will know intuitively, is this is a fantastic resource, but also the threat side of it. Because with Scotland being so blessed with such abundant natural resources, and you know, it always has been in a way, but we're the depths to which I think Westminster may be prepared to stoop in order to prevent independence, and even after we gain independence, to ensure that they keep their claws in with whatever deals are signed subsequently. I think that we are perhaps in danger of underestimating that. And many of us will have seen that. They'll have seen the way that they'll have come after leaders of the independence movements in the past. I think the counter to that, first and foremost, is building that really broad consensus across Scottish society of educating people to the way in which our resources are being stolen from us, that we're not getting the benefit, as Eva said, the benefit that we should be from it. We don't have any sovereign wealth fund sitting there with $2 trillion worth of resources in it. So that's past. And going forward, we're not going to get any of that until we achieve our independence. But independence won't come cheaply as a result. Every game conceivable will be played to try and prevent the will of the Scottish people, which more and more with every year is moving in the direction of regaining our independence. Every game will be played to stop us achieving that. And after we get our independence, I think on day one of independence is really important that we don't let our guard down, because there will be critical mineral deals done at that point. And it's really important that we have the right people in charge when we get independence over the line, that are not just going to rub their hands and say, that's it, we've done it. No, that's actually in some ways when the hardest work of all starts. It's ensuring that Scotland maintains sovereignty over its own natural resources, over its energy resources, the appropriate provision like the Norwegians have done, and I think there's a lot we can learn from Norway, but appropriate provision is made for future generations through things like a sovereign wealth fund, and that we are not signing deals, we're not making concessions that will come to hurt future generations of Scots because they give away the house. So I think those are things maybe just to have on our radar as well in terms of how independence might play out and affect the energy sector. So
yeah. So folks, when you hear Tories and Labour telling us, oh, the SNP are stopping us drilling, oil and gas is reserved, let's never forget that. But here's the thing, we've talked about the things that we could do when we're independent and the things that can be done when you're an independent. Here's just, Ireland has no oil. However, look at this. This is what they're doing during this energy crisis in comparison to the EU. They've cut excise duty on petrol and diesel at the pumps. They've had an extension to the fuel allowance scheme, which pays people €38 a week. They support through an adjustment to the price of home heating oil. They've cut excise duty on agricultural diesel. Hauliers set to benefit from the, cutting the price there as well. In the UK, a payment of 35 to some of the households' heating bills. That's your whack. That's what the UK is giving you, and they've got all the oil at their hands. It just shows you what you can do when you're independent, with or without oil.
But it's about priorities. And unfortunately, Keir Starmer's government does not, in fact, prioritise the majority of the population of the United Kingdom, because his policies tend to benefit the fat cats. And what is wrong here is that the ordinary working man and woman is forgotten about in the midst of this. The poor or the vulnerable or the disabled or the ill become the targets because you have the propaganda about welfare benefits, etc. What's needed, absolutely, is that Scotland should have an independent parliament, but it be populated by the strongest and the most capable within our society, so that you would have the builders, the tough negotiators, the visionaries, the diplomats, the experts, the professors, the medics, and yes, the lawyers, but certainly ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds can do extraordinary things. And that's what the Alliance is all about, because it is populated by strong characters who are putting their necks on the line simply and solely because we're putting country before party, outcomes before incomes. And that's what our country needs. Were we negotiating independence because there had been a majority popular vote and a majority of independents supporting MSPs elected in May, we'd be negotiating from a position of strength with people who are robust, but we would be looking forwards to doing and starting to create and build the institutions and the systems and the processes that we need. We may very well start with a national energy company. We might follow up with a national house building corporation. We might have revamp the national youth hostels to give people leisure time, fire money into education of all sorts, nursery, primary, secondary, tertiary, the whole lot. We could be funding school meals, not just here and there for some nurseries and some primaries, but we could be paying for everybody's dinner throughout each stage of education. We've got the farming resources to do it. We've spoken about other natural resources today. This is a bounteous country, and its bounty should be used for the good of the people of the country. That's what needs to happen, but it will only happen if people elect politicians who truly desire and have a pathway towards regaining our independence. Electing devolutionists, and we'll be sitting here 5 years from now making the same arguments, except the economic position of Scotland will be far worse than it is just now. The health position of Scots may be worse as well, because we know that the length of your healthy lifespan is reducing in many parts of Scotland, and that must be the cost of the union, because there's no other explanation for it.
No, none whatsoever. That list of things that we could do, you missed out one, which was, of course, free gin for pensioners, which is something I'm sponsoring post-independence, ladies and gentlemen. All the nonsense going on, our friends in the union, people saying to us, well, you can't game the system, Phil. It's wrong to try and have, alliances and do things right. Here, I don't know how many of you saw this here, but the Tory party, whose sworn enemy is the Labour Party, of course, Scots leader Russell Finlay has refused to roll out instructing his MSPs to vote for Anas Sarwar, the Chancellor, to be the First Minister. The Unionists are prepared to do alliances, either above board or behind board or back doors, but it seems that the independence movement thinks it's not playing cricket.
Yep, that's true, and that's typical. That's what we're getting here. Is the union is doing what we should be doing, playing the system, and we should be beating the Brits at their own game. And they will continue this. It doesn't matter. The reason they can vote for each other is because there is no difference between both of these parties. You've got, same as in America, the Republicans, the Democrats, Labour and Tory. The same cheeks to the same backside, and you cannot put a credit card between the gap in between. Why? Because there's no difference, almost no difference in policy. So, and you know, this is what he said. You've already articulated. He refused to rule out backing Anas Sarwar to be First Minister, and Mr. Finlay was asked outright if he would instruct his MSPs in the new Parliament to back the Labour leader at the Butte House, and the leader of the non-existent Scottish Labour Party, incidentally, again based in England. And this is when he was in Aberdeen with UK leader Kemi Badenoch of the Tories. So while he refused to be drawn on supporting Sarwar, he said he could never back John Swinney to return to the job. Well, to be honest, that's one of the only things I've got in common with this man, because John Swinney should not be in this job. But first and foremost, he says, I'm fighting for every single Scottish Conservative vote and many Scottish Conservative MSPs as possible, he told journalists. But what he said, he will not support the SNP First Minister. I'm not going to support that. And his comments come following a story in the Scotsman on Monday, which quotes a senior Labour source who said the party winning about a dozen constituencies in Scotland, Central Belt, could put them in a position to lead the government. But they would need the vote of other Unionist parties, including Reform and, of course, the Tories. So this is why John Swinney's wrong. This is why the SNP leadership are in the pocket of those who would keep us on our knees. And so obviously are Labour, Conservative, and the Lib Dems and the Greens.
It's a fact, Gordon, that you know, they will do a deal. The Unionists would sell their granny to protect England's hegemony over Scotland.
Well, you'll notice, Roddy, that when Phil was talking, they was talking about why it is we're not allowed to game the system, but the Unionists somehow are allowed to game the system. And the whole reason is the entire system is designed to be gamed by the Unionist side, whilst trying to convince the rest of us that it's the wrong way to go. But it has to be gamed. If you don't make alliances as we have, 5 of us here today, if we don't make these alliances, we're not going to win in Holyrood at all, because the whole system of Holyrood is designed so that parties game the system. They form alliances and allegiances, they back each other up, they vote for each other's leaders as well. I mean, that has happened before, and it will keep happening. And no matter what they say about who they will or will not ally with, they will. If it suits them, they will. But we're not to do it, because, you know, we're just the puny Scots. We don't matter. We're not allowed to play by the rules. But just because we are mainly, and I'm saying mainly, not entirely, but mainly operating in the list regions, doesn't mean that we can't game the system as well. And we should. In fact, we should game the hell out of the system, because that is the way that you win seats in this kind of potholed election system that the English have created for us. It's designed exactly for this purpose. So I think let's play the game by their rules. And let's play just as dirty as they do. We'll use the same kind of tricks, not quite so underhandedly and maybe not quite so transparently, but let's do it, because if we don't, we're not going to win.
That's the way it is. And here's just another fact, David. I saw this online, I had to grab it. It's very true. They're all, that phrase, they're all cheeks of the same bum. They're all Tories, Tories in red, Tories in blue, Tories in orange, and Tories in a lighter blue. They are all of the same neoliberal, neocons, warmongering, imperialists, every last one of them, and they want to keep Scotland down. Not one of them is saying anything positive about their election campaign. It's all about vote for us to stop the SNP, to stop this independence. Nothing positive.
No.
I can't hear you, David.
There you go. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yep.
I think you see that best in foreign policy, don't you? Like, of the 4 leaders put up there, not one of them would even consider leaving NATO, would they? Not one of them would want the UK to be a voice for peace and dialogue, you know, and improved relations between the West and Eurasia. Not one of them, you know. So they're all, as you say, there's different. It's maybe 57 flavors, but it's all Heinz at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So the packaging might look a bit different. I think there's a lot of truth in that. In terms of, and it is interesting that the split that matters to the Unionists in Holyrood is your position on the UK, ultimately. So we need to, well, we should have the same mentality. And I certainly hope that Swinney, if given an opportunity, wouldn't even think twice about cooperating with the alliance. But I really do think that, and I really do, think as well that the thing that the alliance should be looking for is not for the SNP to fade away into obscurity, just for the SNP to start taking their heritage as a Scottish Nationalist Party seriously and starting to advance serious plans and have serious action that's going to move forward quickly on independence. That's what we're looking for the SNP, from the SNP. If they were doing that, there just wouldn't be the demand for opposition from the alliance. And I think with that, then, you know, we will give the voters a real choice, because they will be able to put pressure on the SNP to start. I mean, that would be a great position to be in. Say we get 10 or 12 MSPs at our first election elected to Holyrood, and the SNP under Swinney now have to think, who are we going to do a deal with? Okay, are they going to? You're not going to have a majority under that scenario with the Greens. So then it will be very stark and it'll be very clear, and you'll have to make a choice. Does he make a deal with a real nationalist alliance that is going to keep the pressure on, that's going to keep their feet to the fire, or is going to reach out to a Unionist party? And if he does the latter, the SNP is finished. That will be their last electoral cycle. So by voting for the alliance, you can put the independence movement back in the driving seat in Holyrood. That is the key thing to take away. It's not about crushing the SNP or anything like that. It's about getting the SNP to return to its roots, to remember what it was formed for. And the only way that you can do that realistically with this cohort of politicians, with the priorities that they have in place, is by putting in power people that truly believe in the cause of Scottish independence and are going to put it first amongst their priorities when they get to Holyrood. It is going to be their overriding objective, is laying the groundwork for Scotland declaring independence, if necessary unilaterally. And that's the position that we're in. And I think the pressure that the SNP would be under those circumstances to get real about independence would be immense. You would see action.
Yeah, I agree. But this is the fact, Eva, that, you know, the Unionists will all club together and work together. We know that the Tories won't stand in certain seats and Labour won't stand in certain seats to make sure they get through the middle. We need to convince the independence movement the same thing, because they're all the same and they will work together to keep us out, the independence people.
Yeah, it's just better together, isn't it? But that's why we need the Yes movement reincarnated. And in essence, the Alliance is the Yes movement, because what we're saying is one thing and one thing alone unites us, and that is that we want independence, nothing less, independence, nothing else. And if you support that, then you're with us. So it would be the easiest thing in the world for John Swinney to instruct his candidates accordingly to cooperate with us. You could lift the phone to any of us at any time and talk about the best way to manage the circumstances so that we do get that supermajority in May. There's plenty of time to do it, but it has to start now. In its absence, what he will continue to do is to say that he needs to get a majority of SNP seats to get that referendum, when we all know that he's not promising us something that he couldn't have done already. It's like all the different policies that have been announced and the proposals contained within their manifesto, none of it's new, it's all rehashed, and it's all stuff they could have done before now. So he's sat there for the last however many years he's been First Minister with an independent supporting majority of seats already and not advanced the cause at all. We had Nicola Sturgeon in 2020 announcing that, you know, things were going to happen. There was going to be a convention. We had Keith Brown repeating that a few times. We had Mike Russell's 11-point plan. We had Jamie Hepburn as the Independence Minister. None of these people have moved the dial at all in a positive direction, but what they have presided over is a drop in support for the SNP on the one hand, and on the other, an increase in support for the notion of Scottish independence generally, not by party. So the problem for Scotland and for our movement is to make sure that the 20 or so % of people who A, want independence, but B, don't support the SNP, have got a political home. And that's what the Alliance to Liberate Scotland comprises, because all you have to do to be part of it is to want our country to be a free nation, a free country, no better than any other, no worse than any other, but standing equally on the world stage. That's what we want. It's what Scotland deserves. And the way to get it is to unify the movement and create the circumstances that in turn make that supermajority real. And then it's down to talking deals about the terms of the independence settlement.
Yeah, well said. And folks, if you want to help with that, you'll notice in the top left-hand corner there's a QR code there. That's all towards the Alliance to Liberate Scotland's election fund. Now, if you're really so hardcore on the belief of independence, throw some money in if you want to help. We tenner here, there. There's about 5,000 to 10,000 you watch this every week across the different platforms. If you're all to throw in a tenner, we would have a hell of a campaign. The clock's beating us, Phil, but there's maybe a couple of things I'd like to get in. But the one I really want, on this programme, we like to talk about have topics that this is, if we had independence, this is what would happen. This is how we get independence, and here's why we should do it. And one of the things I find this week, absolute silence by the UK government on this. Now, for anyone who's not aware, the Israelis who celebrated this with champagne brought in a law where they can hang Palestinian prisoners at will, literally, but it's only for Palestinians. Absolute apartheid, absolutely against every human decency law you can think of. And our government and most of the Western governments, and certainly the United States, have been silent on it. And in fact, Yvette Cooper this week was also talking about sanctioning Iran for having the audacity to defend itself. And that's not a country I want to be involved with. I don't mean Iran, I mean the United Kingdom, that will turn a blind eye to an apartheid capital punishment and will punish another nation for defending itself. I don't want part of that.
No, and this is why we need out of the union, because Yvette Cooper is one of these others that's taken money from the Israelis to further our political career, and she's therefore bought and sold. Not by English gold, that's just us, but by world power domination gold, and that's what the British government are. So this is, even Western media can't hide this evil. So this is even the Sky News are saying Israel passes controversial death penalty law. Controversial, to put it mildly. So opponents of the bill under which executions should be carried out within 90 days of sentencing say it's racist and unlikely to deter attacks. Israel has passed a law making death penalty by hanging the default punishment for West Bank Palestinians convicted of murdering Israelis. Not the other way around, which has happened predominantly, but just for the Palestinians. Now, the UK government, Germany, France, Italy say the move was de facto discriminatory, which is fair, and Israel risks undermining its commitments to democratic principles. What democratic principles? They're still pandering to the Israelis in spite of being able to unavoid the disgusting nature of this. This is evil. This is evil. So Israel, is a nation of sociopaths, with around 80% who want the continuation of the ongoing genocide in Gaza and to support the Greater Israel Project, which is slaughter and control over the whole of the Middle East and the subjugation of the Goyim. And what's that? Well, that's you and me. If you're lucky enough to be one of the chosen people, we are the Goyim. We are second rate, and we will suffer the same fate as the Palestinians. Right now in Syria, where the Israelis have helped and the Americans and the West have helped to put a head-chopping maniac in charge, Christians are being persecuted, prosecuted, slaughtered. Anyone who stands against the regime that's been put in place is being persecuted. This is evil. It must be stopped. Must be stopped. But again, the last point I would make on this, we don't conflate the issue of Judaism and the nationalist Zionism. Zionism's the problem, not Judaism.
Correct. But, you know, to say this is as bad as the Nuremberg laws, Gordon. It's an appalling, and the British government is silent upon it. It's quite disgusting.
The British government is silent upon it because it doesn't want to upset the apple cart for its own purposes, basically. It's aligned itself with America, it aligns itself with Israel, it aligns itself against Iran, but it's tiptoeing around this whole subject. You'll not notice there's not been anything from Keir Starmer about this. Maybe the odd comment saying, yeah, well, it's a bit worrying, but he's not going to make any kind of waves about it. He's not in a position to do that politically. He's too weak. The UK is too weak. It needs its allies, and we are just going to sit on the sidelines here as long as we are part of the UK. Nobody will do anything about it because they're too scared of what the international consequences are for the United Kingdom's trade. And that's all it's about. It's about oil, it's about trade, it's about money and power. It's not about human lives at all. And this discriminatory policy of only executing Palestinian convicted murderers, where there are other convicted murderers who might be much worse and maybe more deserving of such a fate. But the death penalty has been removed in most Western democracies for decades. We don't use it. We never have gone back to it. But we're happy to sit back and let Israel do this. Now, just before you wind up the show, Roddy, I have to scoot off. So I just want to say thank you for letting me be on the show, and to say cheerio to everybody else on the panel. Thanks for letting me take part today.
It's been a pleasure having you, Gordon. We'll do it again before Election Day, believe me. Okay,
well, I have to leave now. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'll look forward to watching back the programme later on the recording. I'll see you all later.
Cheers.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye. This law, and as I say, I don't want to be part of any country that does it, but the other thing is, this guy, he was the leader of ISIS. Not only was he given the red carpet treatment by the chief of the military staff, by the Prime Minister, he also gets in to see the King of England. I just don't want to be associated with, we're associated with murderers, psychopaths, and terrorists. It's quite disgusting, David.
I think it's worse than it seems in a way. If you look at the emergence of Giuliani and the earliest reports on him, there's credible reports that say that he had British handlers right from the very beginning, that MI6 was a key part of his rise to power. And this is someone that has been pictured holding up 2 decapitated heads. This is someone that, in the context of HTS was just rebranded Al-Qaeda. It's sometimes referred to as Al-Qaeda in suits. They're polished up a little bit. But these are people who are extreme Salafists. And this is completely against the character of most ordinary Syrians. Most ordinary Syrians live in a multi-ethnic, pluralistic, tolerant society. That is really the way that they would roll. And they've had, essentially, by outside imperialist powers, had these guys imposed on them. I think it's an absolute travesty. And ultimately, as I said, when it comes to empire, it's about you gain control of the government in order to gain control of their resources. Syria is a very, very important corridor through which I think particularly Qatar and Turkey were keen to run a pipeline, getting oil out of the Middle East, heading towards Europe. So it has been in Western crosshairs for decades, and the depths that they will stoop to. Remember, Al Qaeda were blowing up the Twin Towers just over around about 25 years ago. So it'll be 25 years this year, and now here he is, essentially an ex-Al Qaeda guy, shaking hands with the king, meeting with the chief of the defense staff this week to discuss counterterrorism. Well, if you want a subject expert on counterterrorism, go and speak to an ex-Al Qaeda guy. I mean, it's just shocking. What would an independent Scotland do? I hope an independent Scotland, while it would be pragmatic about the sort of, you can't choose who the leaders are of other countries, but an independent Scotland is my absolute confident belief it would not be committing the original sin of attempting to dictate to other countries who runs them. And if you strip that out, you would have an awful lot more peace in the Middle East today. It's the fact that those with imperialistic, neoconservative mindsets have been allowed to control Western foreign policy that we see travesties like this guy, Jolani, walking the streets of Western capitals today in a suit and being greeted by everyone like he's some hero. Yeah. It's shocking.
Yeah, ISIS get the blame of the Twin Towers. I think there could be another suspect.
Well, yes.
I certainly suspect someone else. But that's the other thing, Eva, and I don't want to be, as I say, associated with this, but also if you remember the wee girl we've spoken about her on here often, Shaminia Begum, who was groomed as a child to marry an ISIS fighter, and had, everything she went through. She's her citizenship stripped from her, and she's not allowed back into the UK because that's bad. But this guy gets in to see the king, the chief of staff, the prime minister. I mean, what the heck is going on here?
But that's just how it works. That's what imperialism is. That young girl was obviously, as you've said, she was groomed, but she's been scapegoated and she's been made an example of, and that's shocking. Also, can I just slightly return to what the previous subject, please, because there's a quite good article in the Human Rights Watch, and they refer to the actual nature of the change to the law in Israel relative to the death penalty for Palestinian people. And it says that this law only allows courts to order life imprisonment in exceptional cases, so that the default position, if you're a Palestinian and you're convicted, is the death penalty. But military trials of Palestinians have an approximately 96% conviction rate based largely on confessions extracted under duress and torture during investigations. The law also restricts access to legal representatives, restricts visits from family members, limits external oversight, and grants immunity to those involved in carrying out the executions. So it's really draconian, completely unfair, got to be illegal, racist, discriminatory against all sorts of human rights law and regulation, and it should really get the rest of the world should be on them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. Well, they're allowed in the Eurovision, but they wouldn't be allowed in the EU if you have capital punishment. One of the few things I would say about the EU that I don't like capital punishment. Anyway, the clock has beaten us, as always, folks. Other subjects I didn't get a chance to talk about was everyone was complaining about the blockade of the Straits of Hormuz and how terrible it is. Everyone was been silent since 1960 or whatever it was, with the blockade on Cuba, with the blockade on Gaza for years. Well, no one was upset about that. But as soon as you start affecting the dollar and the stock exchange and the wealth, they get up in arms about that. The hypocrisy of the Western world is appalling. Anyway, the clock has beaten us. I hope you found this interesting and informative, folks. Let us know what you think. But till we see you again, may you and yours, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.